As we go on to the main story driving the day today, which is a continuing row, started last week, but it's still going on, about the leaked plan to cut the Manchester leg of HS2. Now, if anyone's been under a rock for the past decade, this is the railway line that is supposed to be extra quick and level up the north by making it easier for everyone to get to the south. And if you look at the costs, it seems that each rail is made of solid platinum because it's about £1 billion a mile or something stupid like that. Now, John, it's been leaked that the Tories are going to cut part of it, this bit around Manchester. It's already not going to central London. So it'll end up that there's a high-speed rail link between Birmingham and an outer London suburb. So quite a few people are saying this isn't really worth the price that we're all paying for it. Is it reasonable, do you think, to start cutting bits of it?
Yeah, so the original idea, just to explain, was that you're going to get this new high-speed rail line going between Euston in central London, and then you'd have one leg going all the way up to Birmingham and then Manchester, another leg going between Birmingham and Leeds to kind of go up and then fork into two. Now, last year, or was it maybe the year before last, the government said that they were no longer going to do that eastern leg to Leeds. And now they're looking at suggestions that they could no longer go to Euston in central London. It could stop at Old Oak Common, which probably not many people have heard of until this whole row started. That's because it's in the suburbs of West London, and it could go up to Birmingham and stop there rather than going all the way to Manchester. And so HS2 has become very costly. Back when it was announced by Gordon Brown, it was estimated it would cost about £33 billion. Now it's estimated to be anywhere around £100 billion, potentially could go even higher than that. And so the argument is, do we have the money to pay for this? However, we've already spent so much money so far. Other people are saying, well, what's the point of spending all this money to end up with basically a very quick shuttle service between Birmingham and the outskirts of London? And there were a lot of people raising questions about why on earth are they announcing this now ahead of Tory party conference, which will be taking place in Manchester next week. There are a lot of angry people in the north, people like Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester. He's writing to Rishi Sunak, the PM, today and urging him to convene an urgent meeting. He says that the Prime Minister is disrespecting the people of the north by refusing to talk to them about what exactly he is planning to do with this line. And he says that this is another example of where the government has talked a good game on levelling up. It's talked about, remember at 2019 when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, it was all about how there's these communities outside London which have been neglected for so long that suddenly they were going to get all this attention and life was going to be totally different. And actually the reality is much hasn't changed. And there's been a lot of talk, not much action. And critics of the government will say this is a case in point.
Exactly. This all seems to be a bit of a cock-up one way or another. Now, where do the Tories actually sort of stand? Raz says this is a circus. Quite right too. What do you think, everybody? Are you in the north? Were you waiting to be levelled up? Lee, hang on, his comment's gone. Jacob says he's killed the north, which it could be anybody from Henry II down, frankly. But, you know, where do you stand on this? Do you think this is money that's worth spending? Do you think in the 21st century that actually, you know, having a faster, quicker train is going to make any difference to your ability to work? Why does there need to be a high-speed link between London and the north? Surely the important thing is to have actual proper transport links across the north would help east to west. Lee says, I think I'll vote reform. This is about the Lib Dems, I think. I think I'll vote for reform and I hope they can form the next coalition with one of the smaller parties, along with most of the electorate, if they know what's good for them. You're going to vote for Reform UK. They are never going to have a coalition with the Lib Dems. I think they are on the opposite side of everything to the Lib Dems, Lee. But, you know, best of luck with your optimism for a Monday. It's a bit early, but, you know, we'll see how you feel at the end of the day. Now, how do you feel, everybody, about HS2 being cut? Is this a big waste of money? Is it a big white elephant? Does it make no difference at all to be 20 minutes quicker to London? It seems the way they're actually organising it now to end in Old Oak Common, which is the end of the Piccadilly line, I think, they're actually going to take longer. It takes longer to get to London to Birmingham than it does now. Now, where do the Tories stand on all this, John? Because, you know, although it was a Gordon Brown initiative, it's for the past 13 years, it's been a Tory flagship infrastructure scheme, isn't it? It's fallen into the kind of state-run chaos they said would only be possible under Jeremy Corbyn. And now it's being dismembered before it's even really got off the ground. It's causing massive party ructions. The threats of ministerial walkouts today. Is this, I suppose the question is this just Britain? Are we just crap at doing this kind of stuff? Or is this symptomatic of the Tory party and their malaise at the moment, their inability to check their own homework?
Well, I think you're right. It has obviously did start with Labour and Gordon Brown, but it has had Tories backing it since then. Remember George Osborne, and we used to bang on about the Northern Powerhouse and how he was committed to changing the North, and that didn't really work out either. We've heard David Cameron in the last few days, Boris Johnson saying this would be a mistake. I think, yeah, there is something incredibly depressing about this, that the costs have gone up, and it just seems like we are incapable as a country of building big infrastructure projects. Gordon Brown was on the radio this morning just saying, well, hang on a minute, all these other countries in Europe seem to be able and capable of building high-speed rail lines. Why is it that we just can't do it in the UK? It just seems ridiculous that whether you think the high-speed line should be going between Liverpool and Leeds, or London and Manchester and Leeds, whichever way around you think it should be done, you would think there will be a way that the government would be able to make it happen. We are a developed country. We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But it just seems that there is something going wrong here, that we just haven't been able to do it.
No, and I think perhaps it's something to do with the fact that we're having to build a whole new railway line, as opposed to make the current railway line better, which might be a sort of slightly more sensible way of doing things. Although, of course, they didn't want to stop everywhere and everything else on the high-speed lines. But it's also because there's been so many governments that have wanted to, keep house prices high and keep land prices high and everything else, and subsidise farmers so they didn't want to sell off their fields. And actually, you need to buy fields and buy houses for HS2. So, of course, the costs have gone up and up because of government policies. It's all a bit, nothing is quite tying together, and it's all a bit mad. And what do you think, everybody? Is this Britain? Are we just rubbish at railway lines, even though we invented it? Probably because we invented it. We haven't got our heads around the fact that it's not narrow gauge railways anymore. Or do you think this is something that anyone could fix? Anyone else? Is this just something that every government would kind of fail at and struggle with? Let us know. Now, it's apparently so unpopular within the Tory party, this idea. They might actually move the decision to the autumn budget. And they might say it's only been delayed by 7 years and try to blame Vladimir Putin for it. But Andy Burnham, King of the North, is spitting tacks of pure acid on the airwaves this morning, says it's going to turn the north-south divide into a north-south chasm. And the Liverpool Mayor, Steve Rotherham, says that Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is the scheme to join up cities in the north, actually needs HS2 for a section of it. And so if you don't have HS2, you just have two bits of Northern Powerhouse either side of Manchester, and you've got to take the tram between the two or something. I mean, this is all just ridiculous, John. Have they thought it through? Cancelling it is going to cause just as many headaches as pushing through with it, isn't it?
Well, I think this is why you might see a slight delay in the decision. There was briefing in the Sunday papers yesterday that we might get the decision this week. I mean, as I said earlier, that seemed strange timing when you've got the government, all the Tory bigwigs going up to Manchester next weekend for their Tory conference. So, yeah, I think there are other options. As you say, you could put the delay, you could announce it much later. You could do it at the same time as the autumn statement in November. And you could say we're not fully cancelling these parts from Birmingham to Crewe and Crewe to Manchester. As you say, you could just say you're delaying them, instead you won't be able to do them as quickly as you did before. But I think the scale of the backlash over the last few days from all sides, not just on the Labour side with people like Andy Burnham saying that the government's betrayed the North, but from these big Tory figures, people like David Cameron, Boris Johnson and George Osborne, I think that backlash may have made the government think again and think more carefully about what exactly they're going to do. Yeah,
they're going to be a bit stuffed, aren't they? But then, if they're having to go to Manchester for their conference, I wonder if we should be getting the train or dying by helicopter, which I would expect. John says too many Tory hands in one another's pockets. Don't know what they're doing in there, John. But then, of course, we've got this, it's all just ridiculous. But then, of course, so's the spending on this. There's a lot of money going into it. And the Tories do say they want to save cash. Jeanette says it's going not where the lines are needed, but it's being built where it's not wanted. Now, Rishi doesn't particularly take the train, so why should he care, necessarily? But are there any other big ticket items that they can axe and slash instead to sort of find the money to keep going with HS2?
Well, I think that at the moment it's very hard to make big cuts when the public sector has already seen massive cuts and there's not much willingness in the government to slash the NHS any further. We know that schools are struggling. We know that the government stopped the school building programs, and then we've ended up with RAC, with those dodgy concrete and the roofs possibly falling on children's heads. So there isn't loads of places that government are able to cut, but obviously they are keen to find cuts where they can, because they would desperately love to cut taxes, particularly taxes for their rich pals. We've had the idea, as well as the possible scrapping of parts of HS2 this weekend, we've heard the idea being raised that the government could decide to slash inheritance tax, even though that's only paid by less than 4% of households. And we know who would be a massive beneficiary of this if inheritance did get scrapped. It would be Rishi Sunak, who could potentially save as much as £300 million, according to the
How much?
£300 million. But that's what happens when you've got an awful lot of money.
Good Lord, there's no way he's going to be able to get that one through. And if you actually added up everyone else in the cabinet, because Jamie Hunt's a millionaire, Grant Shapp's a millionaire, and start ticking, that makes me cross. Only 4% of people, 3.7% of people pay inheritance tax. It doesn't mean anything to anybody, most of us. You've got to have more than £1 million inherited, i.e. not have any social care. If you want to have to pay inheritance tax, it's just not going to be the kind of thing that matters to a lot of people. But for 300 million, for a third of $1 billion, I think I might try and change the law as well if I had that kind of cash. Now, I wouldn't expect not to get noticed for it, though. Now, Daniela says, did they spend their budget on the Nightingale hospitals? Look how that all turned out. That's a very good point, Daniela. There was an awful lot of money went into those hospitals, wasn't there, John, during COVID? These sort of clinics that were being set up with lots of equipment and so on around the place to take a lot of COVID patients. And, of course, they barely ever got used. Did that money go back in the pot, or did it disappear?
Well, there was a story around a couple of weeks ago, I'm trying to remember where it was, whether it was our paper or another paper, about how a lot of the expensive beds that had been bought up for the Nightingales, obviously were bought up quickly because the government was desperately needing capacity, or thought they were going to need this surge capacity. But the beds cost several £1,000s. They were being sold off some on the internet for a couple of £100
they were
each.
going on auction, weren't they? That was us. That was the Mirror, I think.
So yeah, obviously a lot of money didn't get particularly brilliantly spent then, but I think that defenders of the government would say, yeah, there were mistakes on things like PPE and the dodgy contracts that we've heard about. But on a lot of things like Nightingale hospitals, the government was just quickly rushing to try and do whatever it could to cope with the sudden spike in the virus.
Yeah, but unfortunately, there was never the staff to run Nightingale Hospital, because you want to put a COVID patient from ICU and put them in a separate place. They need a consultant. They need someone who can specialize in kidneys, someone who can specialize in lungs. They need nurses. It's not just one bed. It's not an option. No one went to hospital with COVID and had one thing and just coughed a bit. That didn't happen. So it didn't really ever work out. Leslie says we wouldn't need these cuts if they hadn't borrowed, even before the pandemic, trillions of pounds. They're spending money we don't have. Who's going to pay for that? We're going to pay for it, Leslie. We're going to pay for it again. They've spent our money. They've borrowed more money from us. We're going to spend that money back. And when they've run out of money, they're going to ask us to pay them back for the money they borrowed off us that they've spent that was to cover the money that they've already taken off us. So you pay about 3 times. That's government, I'm afraid. In return, you get potholes and get secure at the NHS. Thank you, Tories.